Well, good morning and welcome, Lisa. Lisa Macdonald from Face to Face HR. Morning, Lisa. How are you today?
Morning, good, thank you. All good.
Good
Cool.
stuff. Good stuff. Well, welcome to our Munch and Learn for the No Limits community. So, we've got a few questions we're going to run through with you today. I thought it'd be nice to sort of kick us off if you could just give us a brief introduction about yourself. Share your background in HR, especially in the sort of context of small businesses and small business owners, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So my whole career really has been in HR. So over 20 years in HR, predominantly in sort of the generalist world, so touching all aspects of HR. And I was for the vast majority of my career in large corporates, but then as more recently working with smaller businesses. And I think, I've learned an awful lot through my corporate career, but really seeing that where small businesses very often don't have an internal HR person or HR team, and you can see you can add real value by helping them along the way and encouraging them in terms of managing their people and growing their business. So that was my kind of interest in HR, and I think particularly for small businesses, giving that real practical down-to-earth HR advice. There's no point in talking about lengthy, expensive, unnecessary processes. It's about keeping it real for that small business.
Yeah, that's really true, isn't it? Because, like you say, the big corporates, they have the luxury of having a HR function or department or resource. But there's so many small businesses out there that just don't have that support. And it's quite often one of those areas that you don't really realize you need it until it's almost too late. It's kind of, yeah. Absolutely. So what was your sort of main motivation to sort of get into the small business world then? You come from a corporate background. What was your sort of key driver to actually come and work with small businesses and help them?
A couple of things. So I think you being able to see that you can make a difference really quite quickly. So where small businesses may just simply not know how to tackle something because they haven't seen it before. There's lots and lots of things that don't come up very often in a small business environment. So, and therefore being stuck as to kind of where to start handling a particular issue. And it could be something, not necessarily a big conflicting type issue, but it could be the very first time you have a pregnant employee, for example, just not knowing how best to manage that employee through their pregnancy, how you manage maternity leave appropriately, keeping yourself legally compliant. So you can, by giving quite simple, straightforward advice, you can really make a big difference to those small businesses, not in terms of keeping them compliant, but it's more about giving the employees a very good experience through being managed in a well way. And that's very rewarding, I think, for me, particularly for small businesses.
Yeah, so another good point is the impact that it has on the team, the morale, the culture of the organisation, knowing that the team knowing that they've got that support there for them as well, and they're not alone.
Yes,
not alone
definitely.
in the marketplace. So you mentioned sort of like things like one-offs and stuff that doesn't typically come up very often, like pregnant or some sort of individual circumstances. What would you say are the sort of most common challenges or unique challenges to small businesses that that they face in terms of human resources management?
I think so it comes back really to not having that, or having limited resources to dedicate to HR functions. So whether that be recruitment or training, employee development, they just don't have that dedicated expertise. So I guess linked to that as well then is big challenge keeping up to date with employment law changes and regulations, and then understanding what that means. So when a law changes, how does that change potentially an HR process that you're following or a policy? So things can become out of date really quite quickly if you just don't have someone keeping them on top of the changes that have happened. So policies and contracts, I often would see come out of date as a result of that. So that's a challenge. I think that those the one-offs, as we talked about, but particularly within the team, so interpersonal dynamics. So anything to do with employee conflict, that in a small team environment, that can have a massive impact, because
Yeah.
you feel it, don't you? Everybody feels it if
Yeah.
there's that kind of conflict going on. And very often small businesses just don't have the expertise to manage those situations effectively. And part of that is thinking about managing them quickly, so getting on top of it, but also managing them sensitively for everybody that's involved. So I think that is quite a big challenge. And
Yeah, business is lonely, isn't it? It's a lonely place if you're the
yeah,
business owner, and there's, like you say, there's a lot of legislation changes and policy changes, and it's hard enough to keep up with your own industry and your own area and your sort of own sales, marketing, and all that sort of stuff, let alone keeping on top of all of the sort of policy and legislation changes. And then if
exactly.
you are on your own facing challenges, kind of who do you turn to? Who do you talk it through with?
Yes, exactly. And sometimes that's where inconsistencies creep in as well. So, as a business grows, the management responsibility, so that manager suddenly now is going, managing more staff, and therefore kind of their time split across a greater number of staff. And also at that point, you've been making the decisions, you've been handling the decisions of the business on a day-by-day basis. But some of the things, like your position on, it could be anything like pay increases or time off for medical appointments, flexible working, all of those, they haven't really been set in stone yet. You haven't had a firm position and clearly established what your position is on those kind of things. So what happens is the decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. And then that's when some of the inconsistencies start to creep in, and kind of the feeling of unfairness. Well, somebody was treated this way, but I've been treated that way. And that's just, again, because you're handling it all yourself. You've got no one to bounce those ideas off and test your thinking. That can often happen.
So we've covered some of the challenges around the one-offs, the individuals, some of the sort of policy changes and things like that. What would you advise business owners to sort of do to keep on top of those resources if they haven't got HR support, if they haven't got someone like yourself to give them that support? Where do they go? What do they look for?
I mean, I think there's a certain amount you can, certainly through things like the ACAS, using ACAS, so there's a certain amount of stuff that you can find. But I'd recommend definitely getting some form of HR advice.
Yeah.
I think sort of Googling things, I definitely wouldn't recommend. You'll get a million and one answers. The same way as we Google anything, really, you'll get lots and lots of different answers. So I think finding that trusted advisor is really is important. But there
Yeah,
are good
the
organizations there.
risk of self-diagnosis by Google, isn't it?
Yeah, nightmare.
You
Don't do it for
you get a
anything.
testy cough and you Google it, and next thing you know, you're fucking yeah,
Yeah,
making prices.
exactly. Yeah, so
Very
wouldn't
good.
that.
And you mentioned about team. You sort of brought up team and in several aspects of what we just talked about. And obviously, I think for a lot of business owners at the moment, recruitment in particular, it can be a bit of a challenge at the moment. There are good people out there, but it does seem to be that there's a bit of a shortage of people, and sort of getting the right talent and getting the right people for the business. So, what do you think are the biggest challenges that business owners encounter when it comes to recruiting and getting that right talent in the UK at the moment? What do you think the big
Particularly
issues are?
in small businesses. I think, particularly for small businesses, they and medium-sized businesses, but they are ultimately, you can offer what you can offer in terms of salary and benefits package, but it can be quite challenging because they can be seen to be competing with larger businesses who may be offering a what's perceived to be a sort of more attractive salary and benefit package. So that's kind of that always has been a challenge, and will continue to be. So I think also for small businesses, it's about being able to demonstrate that what does the career path look like in that business. So how do you develop people, and how can you show them that their career can be developed and go places in a small business where there may be limited opportunities. So those kind of challenges are definitely particular for unique to small businesses, I think. But to be honest, some of the other challenges are across lots of other businesses, like getting across what your business is all about, what you actually value. That's going to be the case for any kind of business. And I've seen a much greater focus on a good employee experience and focus on employee well-being. So, and those are kind of challenges that all businesses are facing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that engagement and retention,
Exactly.
and retention piece is really important. So it kind of brings me back to that sort of Maslow hierarchy of needs in terms of a sense of purpose, sense of belonging. Our chief want as human beings is a sense of that belonging and purpose, and it's trying to get across through the recruitment process actually what it's all about to work for the small business, what the benefits are, what's different about the bigger, you guys to the bigger sort of corporates and stuff. Are there any specific strategies or approaches that you could recommend to those sort of small medium businesses looking to attract and then retain the top talent that's out there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it comes back a little bit to what I was saying about being really clear about what your business is about. Because as much as salary and benefits, they, of course, they're valued, aren't they? But those really strong candidates that you're trying to attract, they're going to be more interested as well in what your values and your priorities are as a business, and what you believe in, because they will want to align with those. They'll want to work for a company that they can identify with.
Yeah.
So I think the clearer that you can be about your company's ethos, your values, and talk about it. Talk about it on your website, on social media, anywhere that you're advertising. Basically, talk about what it means, to what's important to you as a business, and what it means to work for that business, and give people an idea of what it might be like to work in the business. Because what I find is people who are already aligned with your values, they're kind of more likely to fit into the team for a start, and then get up to speed quicker, and therefore probably more likely to stay longer. So that's being very clear about that is one thing that certainly businesses can do.
Yeah, it's very much a marketing strategy these days, isn't it? The recruitment piece. It's actually you're almost into the candidate is almost interviewing the business around what the business can do for them, and like you say, aligning those core values and beliefs and things like that are really, really, really powerful ways for attracting but also retaining good people that align to your values.
Exactly, yeah. And another thing that we've heard a lot about is flexibility. So,
Right, okay.
It's well known that flexibility is something that employees really value. And fair enough, it's not going to be possible in every job, but certainly if you can offer some form of flexibility, I think it's important to shout about it in wherever you're recruiting, so that people are aware that that's something that not only do you value, but that you can offer. And that's helpful. It's not going to be possible for every job, but you can think quite creatively about flexibility, and it shows that you've moved with the times, and that you recognize that what employees are interested in.
Yes, that's a great shout. One of the fears that I come across a lot is that sort of is losing control. So having, where do you stop with the flexibility? How do you come up with the right mix and things like that? Any sort of words of advice to help business owners when they're thinking about being more flexible?
I think the key thing is to start with, what if I do this, what impact will it have on the business? So you do need to have some parameters around flexibility, because and decide, what is going to work for your business. So it's fine to say, actually, I don't think that 100% remote working is going to work for my business, and these are the reasons why. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But I think what sometimes the pitfall is, business owners say it's just never going to work, or I don't like it, and that's not constructive necessarily. It doesn't help employees understand where you're coming from. So think about it. How could it work? Put some parameters around it, absolutely, and then describe, relay those and describe those to employees and get their buy-in, get their feedback and their thoughts on what they're looking for. Because I think sometimes as well, business owners can think that employees are going to ask for a huge amount of flexibility and not work while they have that flexibility, and very often that's not the case, but it does need closely managed. It is a different management relationship and style to manage somebody who is working more remotely than you're seeing in the office every day, for example. You need you need to set up different ways of managing that person and staying in touch, but it's all doable.
It's all doable. I think like the way you described it, it's going through the different parameters and the permutations in a safe environment, sort of thinking it through, talking it through. And I guess that's again where the trusted advisor comes in, where somebody who's got experience outside in other industries, seen it happen elsewhere, can talk through, well, if you do that, that could happen, this could happen, that can happen, and sort of talk through the different permutations.
Exactly.
Really. Okay, so we've kind of sort of got through the recruitment piece, so we've managed to attract the right people. We've got some, sort of good offerings to get people in with the flexibility and the culture of the business and things. How can small businesses sort of foster a really positive culture that enhances the employee engagement and ultimately retention? What sort of things can they do to create that really positive workplace culture?
I think it ultimately starts with your managers and the business owner and your managers, if you have managers in place as well. Because if you think about sort of the values and particularly the behaviors that you'd want to see in your employees, are you as a business owner and your managers, are you also demonstrating those? So that sort of classic lead by example thing. I mean, it doesn't go away. It is very important, leading from the top and demonstrating those kind of behaviors and the ways of working and how you would treat people. Is that all happening from the top? Because if it is, then your employees will naturally see that is the kind of way of working that you value and you like and are comfortable with, and that just creates a much more comfortable environment. So that's I think the first part of it, but really open communication as well. So encouraging employees to share their ideas, their feedback, their concerns, and be able, and knowing that they can do that without any repercussions. I mean, if they can do that, then naturally the conversation will flow. Whereas if there is a feeling that if you raise a concern that there will be a detrimental impact to it, then obviously that makes employees feel like they don't want to share and they don't want to engage because they're not too sure what the outcome is going to be. So when we say open communication, we have to really mean it. We have to be able to ask for the feedback, receive the feedback, act on the feedback, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing everything that employees want, but you're making some changes and you're able to explain why other things may not work, for example. But so it really has to feel like a two-way thing.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's that safe environment to be able to have that honest conversation about what you're really thinking and how you feel, because our actions and behaviors are driven by our thoughts, aren't they? So if we're thinking as an employee that I'm not going to get listened to, it's kind of what's the point? And
exactly.
Changes your behaviors is to what's the point, and your engagement drops and things like that. So powerful stuff.
Exactly.
What would you say are some of the sort of common pitfalls that small businesses should be aware of when it comes to things like employee satisfaction and again that retention piece? What are the biggest sort of things that they normally fall foul of or they drop into?
I suppose it's about assuming that your employees are happy without, sometimes the pitfall can be, well, no one's complaining, so everything must be okay. But that's not necessarily the case, because people can come to work and do a job and go home, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they feel, valued and are actually engaged and want to stay and grow with the business. They're just there to, to do their job. So I think not asking for that feedback is a bit of a pitfall, definitely. I think also with small businesses, you tend to find that lots of people can be doing multiple roles. It's just the nature of small businesses, so, and wearing multiple hats. So being aware of one of potential burnout, so people becoming overwhelmed with how much they have to do, but also that not all employees will be happy just to pick up a bit of everything. So employees can start to feel quite disengaged if they're just dumped on with a lot of other things that may not be their area of interest, but particularly their area of expertise. It's really hard work, isn't it? If you've got a role and then you've got this extra bit and this other extra bit, and actually you don't really understand them. It's not what you were there to do, and it's a massive learning curve. Now, some people will love that and get after it, but not all employees will, and then that can feel quite disengaged because they feel a bit dumped on, really.
Yeah.
So being careful about that is important as well.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's having those sort of common goals, so you know what you're working towards, having the rules of engagement, where your boundaries are, and sort of understanding exactly what it is that you're doing in the organisation, what your purpose is.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned in that you know, getting feedback from your employees on a regular basis, even if if nobody's complaining, everything's okay, right? So it's actually kind of get your feedback even if nothing's being said. What sort of mechanisms would you suggest to the business community out there to be able to gather that information, and how frequently should you be asking, and what sort of questions should you be asking of your employees?
So nothing can be better than those regular check-ins with your employees. So
Yeah.
those regular one-to-ones are absolutely critical, and not just at the beginning of employment, right? Seeing that right the way through, because you tend to find that this is on an individual basis, anything that is bothering the employee, or from a performance perspective that isn't quite there, if you address them early on, it's massively helpful. You tend to find they can be resolved, in many cases they can be resolved, and you end up with a much happier and engaged employee right from the beginning. So on an individual basis, I absolutely highly recommend doing one-to-ones regularly. And they don't need, those one-to-ones, they don't need to be overly formal, and they don't need to be overly lengthy, but it's a good check-in point on settling into the organization, growing in and developing in the organization, and getting an idea of what it is employees are looking for, because they're all different, aren't they? So not, employees will all be looking for different things out of their work career, but being on top of that and understanding, making sure you're using their skill set appropriately, and addressing any concerns. I think on a more of a general, if you wanted to understand more about benefits, for example, that employees really value, very simple, straightforward survey tools that you can use to gather that information. And that is all about asking the right questions, and getting as specific as possible in those questions, so that whenever you do get the feedback, you can actually do something with it.
Very good. Yeah, no, very good. So to wrap up, any sort of top tips, top 1-2 things that people should be doing to help them with their HR challenges through 2024?
I think key things are keep those communications, really clear communication with your employees. That is probably whenever issues happen, it will almost always come back to poor communication or lack of support. So people shouldn't bury their heads in the sand. I think that's a key thing for managing staff. Be clear with them. They aren't mind readers at all. You need to tell them what you'd like them to do and how you'd like them to do it. So, and keep that communication open. Seek advice early if you've got any issues. Very important. And in terms of if you are growing your business, the more far in advance you can think about that recruitment strategy, the easier I think it will be to recruit that talent into your organization, because it is still quite challenging out there. So if that's in your plan for this year, get ahead and start getting a plan in place for not only how are you going to recruit, but a really effective job, job advert, job description is key, absolutely key. And shouting out all the benefits and what makes your business different to work for.
Yeah, very, very, very true. And for anybody wanting to reach out, where can they find you? What's the best place to contact you?
So on LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, on my website as well. And those are the main places.
Fantastic. Lisa, thank you ever so much for this morning. That's been really, really useful and very enjoyable. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
That was lovely. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Right. Speak to you soon.
Take care.